She has been an instructional coach with Charlottesville City Schools for the last 3 years at the elementary level. Jennifer has a bachelor's in fine arts from Virginia Commonwealth, and then also a master's in school administration from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. She brings to us an extensive experience with Canvas, both at the middle school and elementary level, and was fortunate enough to participate in InstructureCon 2018. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Jennifer, your topic for today is from standards to outcomes. So do you want to tell us a bit about, why you chose this as your topic, why people should be interested in this, why we should get excited about this?
So in the last, obviously now the landscape has sort of changed for Canvas. We're moving into a world of virtual school, but in the years prior that I've been using Canvas, it's been a supplement to in-person learning. And so what I've really been focused on, especially the last few years in elementary, is really getting Canvas to work for us and provide us with rich depth of information about our students to help instruction. And by utilizing outcomes in Canvas courses, you are really able to access what your students know and what they still need to grow in a really clear and effective way. And so, and it's a way that's engaging for students, and it's a way that's easy for teachers to engage with and to understand and track. So that's the main reasons I chose this topic, because it's something that I've been really focusing on and working on the last couple of years. And when we get a chance to go into the course, I'll be able to show you a little bit more of what that looks like for the teacher end of things.
Yeah, I can see the reason why this would be really important for teachers trying to move into online instruction, particularly in an LMS, and utilizing Canvas to do that, because that's really where it does begin, is the focus on those objectives, those learning objectives, and then the activities and the different ways that you'll engage learners, how you'll assess that, and then finally the tools that you'll use. Kind of considering all those things as teachers build those online learning experiences for students. So let's move into some of the things that you'll cover today. Here are a list of the kind of topics. So I don't know if you want to do kind of a rundown through those as kind of an overview.
Sure, no problem. So the first thing I'll do is I'll give you kind of another overview of why we want to use outcomes. And to do that, I'm going to show you an illustration of the kind of feedback you get from having outcomes in your course, which is, of course, the end goal. The next couple of steps are going to be about how you actually get outcomes into your course and then how you apply those outcomes. So we'll look at adding outcomes, and then we'll look at adding those outcomes to rubrics, which are used to score assignments, discussions, things like that, and then how you add outcomes to your quizzes. And then at the end of that, I'll have a couple of just ideas, some related, some sort of unrelated, to help guide your work as you move forward in doing these things in your own courses. So that's the quick overview.
Okay, the quick overview. And it sounds like we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to let you then, Jennifer, take over. You can, let me stop sharing my screen so you can start sharing yours. And we'll move into, you kind of move through your course and go through those topics that you outlined for us.
Sure. Okay, so is everyone able to?
Yes, great. Yeah, we're watching your screen.
So when I shared my screen, I was unable to hear anyone. Do you have any thoughts about how that can be fixed?
Okay, so when you do your screen share,
Mm-hmm.
at the bottom of the screen, there's share computer auto, and then I think, is that what, I think that may help you there then, so you can also hear us.
So under share, I've clicked share and I've got desktop.
Right, so which, yeah, if you share your desktop, then also at the bottom of that screen, there should be one for the sound. Is that what you're?
I'm not seeing anything for sound.
Okay, let me make sure we've got you at the correct role.
Yeah, I apologize.
that's okay. Okay. Okay, try that again. I think that you're set up correctly in Zoom, Jennifer. So
Okay. Oops. Are you able to hear me?
I can still hear you, but I'm not able to see your screen yet. So.
Okay. Okay. Are you able to see my screen and hear me now?
Yes, I can
Okay.
see and hear
Success.
you. Great.
Perfect.
Thanks for your patience in working through that.
Thank you.
All
All
right.
right. So this is a sample course that I've copied. It's actually a course I created for one of our teachers for summer school. So our summer school is called Summer Connections. So you can see this is my teacher view. We try and keep it really simple. I have eliminated everything from the screen for the students except the buttons that I want them to have. So obviously this is set up for virtual learning. So we have their Google Meet links, and then we have a couple of other links for their content areas, and then ClassFlow, which is something we're using for our live virtual instruction. So the first question I wanted to start with, or the first kind of topic, is why do we want to use an outcome in our Canvas course? And so I'll give you an example. This is what is called the Learning Mastery Gradebook. And so when you turn that feature on and you start using outcomes in your assignments and your quizzes, you're going to start getting reports on your students. So right now you can't see the students. They're over here under this box. I've hidden their names, of course, but this is from a course that I've used in previous years. So you can see across the top bar here, these are the learning outcomes that I've put into my course. And I generally name them just for the outcome or the standard name. So 3.3b is one of our reading standards. And underneath that in the column, you can see how each student has performed. So this is their rating. And based on the color, I can tell how they're doing. So blue is exceeds mastery, green would be mastery, yellow near mastery, and red is well below mastery. So right off the bat, this is of enormous help to me because I can look at a glance and see which students are really struggling with the standard and which students have mastered it and are ready to move on. This is great for grouping. This is great for checking out and seeing what students need to be retaught. It also is great for looking at the whole group because if you hover over the actual standard itself in the gradebook, it pops up a whole group pie chart or data on how your whole class is done. So you can see when I've hovered over, this is comprehension of fiction, it tells me that 7% of the students are exceeding expectation, 32% are meeting expectation, and 61% have not met expectation yet. So that's a great tool because at a glance, I can see really quickly, do I need to reteach this to the whole group or can this be small group instruction? But this in a nutshell is why outcomes are so valuable and why I push to put them in every course that I create, because it allows you very clearly to track how your students are doing. And I sort of am a big proponent of setting things up and sort of letting them passively provide you with really valuable information, which is what this allows us to do. Because it is a little bit of setup on the front end of things, but in the end, you get all this really rich depth of information about how your students are doing and how they're progressing. So what that leads us to is how do we get these in here? So the first thing you'll need to do is add the outcomes to your course. So on your course navigation, which are the blue words off to the left, I'm going to select outcomes from the menu. And in this course already, I have imported some reading outcomes. So you can see I've got a series of reading outcomes over here. Now, the great thing about Canvas is they've got guides everywhere. So you can see just on the outcomes page, it gives you a nice breakdown of what we use outcomes for, how we get them, why we would use them, etc. For most of you, you will likely be able to search through your district provided outcomes or standards to find the ones you need for your course. If that's the case, and to find out, all you have to do is click Find, and I'm going to select Account Standards. And I'm with Charlottesville City Schools, so I can see right here I have Charlottesville City Schools. Now, this does not bode well for the presentation purposes, but for some reason over the last 2 days, our system account standards have disappeared. So 2 days ago, they were all there. Today, they're not. I'm not sure if there's some kind of glitch in the system, or maybe it's just me and my computer right now. But normally, this would show me the list of all of the content areas, and then I would be able to select a content area and then select a grade level. And it would show me all of the standards for that grade level, which is great because then I can just pick and choose the ones that I want. Generally, and if you look at the ones I've got selected here, these are mostly the tested standards. So usually I import all of the tested standards because those are the ones we're most concerned with tracking closely. If you do not have the good fortune of having your district import all of your standards for you, you have a few options. The first is you can import a CSV. So, and I'm not sure, it says JSON format as well. I'm not familiar with that format. A CSV is just very similar to a spreadsheet. If you have the good fortune of having access to a spreadsheet with your standards in it, it will allow you to import that and sort of bulk import them. If you do not have access to a CSV file that already exists, I would say that it's probably not worth your time to create one just to import it unless you want to save it for some reason. At that point, it's probably easiest just to add individual outcomes. And this is also true. Let's say you have something that you want to track, some aspect of student progress that you want to track that's not a typical standard or not a state standard. You would then add a group and add outcomes. So in order to do that, if you don't have standards through your district and you can't import a CSV, what you can do is you can just add an outcome. Now, you have two options for adding an outcome. You can just add an outcome and it's just going to show up like 3.8 through vocabulary does, which is just an individual single outcome by itself. If you want to organize your outcomes, you can add a group. And in that case, they will show up like a file folder. So they'll show up like the 3.2 oral language did, which is we have a file folder, and when you click it, you have nested within it a set of standards. So let's say, for example, I wanted to add some reading standards. I can hit Add Group, and I'm going to call this Reading. And I'm going to hit Save. And so now I have an empty folder called Reading, and I can add any standards that I want to that reading folder. So at this point, I would just click Outcome, and I'm going to title this standard. And so let's say I want to track reading stamina for some reason. I can put reading stamina in. You can put a friendly name if you want to. The reason you might want to put a friendly name in is because that's the name that shows up in the Learning Mastery Gradebook. So at the top of the column, this is what's going to show up. If you choose to put something different than the standard name in there, just make sure it's something easily recognizable so that when you're scrolling through your Learning Mastery Gradebook, you'll be able to identify what that standard is quickly. Underneath that, you have a box that allows you to put in a description. You may not need that. I put reading stamina as the title of my standard or my outcome. You know, I can elaborate on that if I want to, but I don't have to. And below that is where it gets really technical. So this is, I'll admit to you, I have not fully wrapped my brain around what the math behind this is and what it exactly means. So, and I've gone back and forth with my principal kind of debating what the best setup for this section is. So I think this is the kind of thing that you kind of have to discuss with your colleagues and decide what you think is the most accurate representation of mastery of a skill. Because essentially in this section, you're setting up the rubric. You're setting up how the student is going to be scored and how they're going to achieve mastery on a particular standard. So, and I'm sorry, I keep using standard, but standard and outcome in this situation are pretty much interchangeable. Canvas refers to them as outcome, but habits die hard, so I keep saying standard. Criterion ratings, this section here, which is criterion ratings, this is going to be utilized when you're creating a rubric. So this is the scoring that will be reflected if you pull this standard in and apply it to a rubric. You can add if you feel like exceeds, meets, and does not meet is not, it doesn't provide enough phases or stages. You can add something just by clicking insert. Usually I'll click insert and I'll add nearly meeting. You can see I add it pretty often because it comes up. So I'll put nearly meets expectations, and you can assign a point value to that. So I'll say 2 points. So now the child can fall into one of those 4 categories. The other thing you need to pay attention to is mastery at. So this is saying if a student, let's say they do an assignment and they're scored on a rubric, if they receive 3 points, they will have achieved mastery according to this. And we've identified up here that 3 points meets expectations. Now, I've gone back and forth again with my principal about, like, should this be a 3? Should this be a 4? Like, what does mastery really look like? How do you demonstrate mastery? So that's a debate for another day, but just understand that this is something that you can adjust if you are not happy with the numbers that they provide for you. Underneath
Jennifer,
this,
let me stop you there before you move forward, because that's one of the things, trying to clarify that. So one of the things you spoke to was getting the district level, someone at the district level, to help you with getting the standards or those outcomes into the system, so that they're already there to choose from, which is beneficial. And since, you know, the whole school district is kind of moving in that direction, there could be motivations to get that in place. So we'll work on finding some resources for the administrators at the district level to understand that process. So maybe we can save trainers and teachers some steps there. But as they get in here, setting this up, is this something that, I mean, you've kind of worked your way through this? Do you work with, you know, like the grade level or groups of teachers to decide, you know, what this is going to look like? Is that something that grade level teams maybe should brainstorm around what this should look like, and like those different sets for the criteria? Is that, do you have any ideas or recommendations around how teachers can maybe collaborate on building this so that they don't feel like they're trying to make all these decisions on their own?
Yes, I think absolutely the higher up this conversation can happen, the better, right? So, like, ideally your division or your district would decide these are the settings that we think are appropriate for our students and we think are most reflective of mastery. So, like, and they just provide that information to you. So if it were up to me, I would advocate that at a district level, someone makes the decision that, you know, we're going to do a 5-point scale and mastery is at 4 points, and we're going to use decaying average. I mean, those are the things that it's best if all of us are doing the same thing. So short of that happening, which obviously most of us don't have a lot of control over that. So short of that happening, I would say, at least at the school level, I think it's best for collectively.
Right. Jen, we may have lost your audio again.
Method. And this is how they take all that data from what the student has done and how they calculate with that data where the student stands on the scale. So you have multiple options. You have decaying average, which is the one that I usually leave it set to, which means that whatever their most recent response is weighted the heaviest. So in this case, 65% of their score is calculated based on their most recent work. There is another one that says number of times, which means that they have to achieve mastery 5 times before they achieve a mastery rating. So until that point, they would, I guess, be, I've never used this one, so I'm guessing a little bit here, but I would say that prior to them achieving mastery 5 times, they're probably at nearly meets or at does not meet. And then most recent score just is exactly what it sounds like. It takes whatever the most recent result is, and that's just their score. So let's say you did perfectly on the last test. That's your score. You have mastered that standard. Now, personally, both that and highest score, I have a sort of a problem with, because a lot of the times we're using multiple choice quizzes to get these results, and there can be a fluke. You can accidentally pick the right answer, and so I don't want my entire understanding of what you know about a standard to be based on maybe an inaccurate representation of what you can do, which is why I think probably the decaying average or even the number of times is a better way to go, because it gives you a more holistic picture of what that child is capable of, as opposed to just saying, when did you happen to get the highest, or when did you what did you do the very last time you did this? Because we all know we have off days. So I would say, for me personally, I'm going to stick with decaying average. If you do decaying average, you can adjust this number. So you can make it higher or lower than 65. 65 just seemed to be a fairly good balance, because theoretically, the most recent time they took something, they should know the most, right? So it makes sense to weight that more heavily. So those are all the decisions you have to make if you create a standard. So once you've created that, you just hit save, and now this standard exists within your course. Any of that is easy to undo. You can easily come back and delete anything that you decide ultimately you don't want to keep in your course. That means the standard, just like I did that, and the folder as well. You can just hit delete and get them out of there. So it's fairly quick to set up, fairly quick to get rid of. I would say the main thing you need to pay attention to is if your district has provided standards, and we can look at those. You can go back and look at how they have set up their scoring. And I would say if you add any to that, you need to stay with their scoring theme or their scoring setup. So I would try and replicate whatever they provided for you. And then I would also make sure that every standard that you import into your course, or every standard in your course, has the same scoring system, because why would you want it not to? It just makes sense. So that's the quick overview of how to get outcomes into the course. So I don't know if we want to pause for a minute and maybe
there is one question that just came in, and it's something that I think is, if the district sets that and you import those and then you open that up, can teachers still change that? So it had 5 and 3 and 0. Can teachers change that to add in, like you add in the nearly meets, to kind of give a better understanding for you? If a teacher, I take it from what you said, they can change it.
You can.
But you also said they should stay consistent. So
you can, and I let me say that with a caveat though, because I would say that in both districts that I've used Canvas in, I don't know that there was necessarily an understanding or a recognition that that scoring system exists, that you can manipulate that scoring system. So I don't know that it was consciously selected when those standards were uploaded. I think maybe that was just that's just the Canvas standard. It has to set it at something, and so when you put in a standard, that's just the scheme that it applies to it. So I think that would be a
default setting.
Exactly. So I think that's just a conversation you need to have. Like, is this, do you want me to stick with this, or is this changeable? And again, I think the more consistent we can be with what we're applying, the better. Because you just don't want to be all over the place with that.
Right.
Because then you're not comparable, right? So like, even from classroom to classroom, I want to know that like mastery in this room is the same as mastery in this room, because really it should be.
Right. And I think that's true to the term that you've used to refer to this, that standard. And I think it's also wise, as you've pointed out, to have those conversations, certainly at the school level. And you mentioned many times having those conversations with your principal, very important to make sure that, you know, everybody has the same understanding of what those outcomes mean. And then for the principal, I guess, to carry that further up to the, you know, the district level leadership as to, you know, what they want to be put in place. And that should sort of be decided upon, well, it shouldn't sort of, it should be decided upon before that upload happens. Because once that initial upload happens, if there's any changes, teachers are going to have to go standard by standard to make those changes. So,
yes.
And then another question, this initial standard, the default score is set. That's what Jennifer's telling us, that what we see in the example she provided was the kind of the default score that's set. And yes, so if you don't use that default setting, you would have to go in and change each one of those. So I think it's wise to have that settled before that upload happens. It may be able to be overwritten by a second import of those, but I'm not sure about that. I have a couple of notes here to ask some technical questions around importing the standard outcomes, so that we can pass that on to district admin so they have a full understanding before they head in this direction. And Jennifer, I think this is something, as you're presenting this, and the potential here is really strong, but probably something for most people just getting started. And as you said, you've been with districts for a while. This is something that being aware of it, knowing that it's there, kind of getting your an idea of how you want to utilize this, but it's something that districts would grow into or grow towards,
Yes.
not something that would have to be in place before we get up and running for the school year. So
no, and certainly you can.
Here.
Yeah, you can certainly just start this at any point. Like, you know, it's really just making your Canvas course work for you. And so when you're at a certain level of comfort, I think it's great. It's a great thing to throw in on top of the base course as a bonus. Yeah.
Right, but those power users could follow your directions with creating some of those to explore that and really focus on one particular outcome or standard that they were trying to achieve with students, perhaps something that they know from, you know, the assessments that they've given as a real area of focus. They could go in and create that for their own purposes. But again, that's kind of a second layer of moving into this, and kind of something that's available for teachers, but it's not a necessity right at the start. So, okay, so let's get back to what you were going to show us inside of your course, and then we'll see if other questions come up as we go. Thank you, Jennifer.
No problem. I'm going to share with you again, and this time we're going to move into kind of, we have outcomes in our course now. We need to figure out how to use those. So we've got to figure out how to attach them to student activities so that we can start getting that feedback. So I'm going to share again. It is not cooperating. Hold on. It keeps taking me off screen. There we go. Okay.
There we go. Now I can see yours. Yes, you're good.
Perfect. Yes. So we left off in the outcome screen. So I can see right now all of the outcomes that I have imported into my course. What we need to look at now, and the best way to attach outcomes to just regular classroom assignments. So this would be like your day-to-day assignments where you're having, let's say, a kid turn in an essay or turn in a video, is to attach your outcomes to a rubric. And then that rubric is then attached to an assignment. So within this outcome screen, in the upper right corner, you'll see a button that says Manage Rubrics. And this is where we're going to go to attach a rubric, or to create a rubric to attach to assignments. There is other places you can go to create a rubric. You can do it directly from the assignment if you want to, but we happen to be in the outcome screen, so that seemed like the easiest place to start. So once you get onto this rubric screen, you'll see I've already created a couple of sample rubrics. I'm going to go ahead and create another one so you can see. So we're going to, in the upper right corner, select Add Rubric, and you just have to give it a title. So I'm going to call it Sample 3 because I'm very creative. And then you can give it, for a rubric, you can set your own criteria. So I can just come up with something that I want to look at. So my brain's going blank, but whatever it is you want to do, you can click here and you can change the description and make it anything that you want. So if you're doing something like about speaking, let's say the child is giving a speech, maybe this can be something about their speaking in front of the class. So I would set that, and then I would set the range over here. And it's just like when we added in the outcomes, when we adjusted that rubric that was on each outcome, you can add different levels or stages. So I have 0 to 5 right now. So they either get no marks or full marks. So if I wanted different, if I wanted to add 1, 2, 3, 4 in between that, I can. So, but that's neither here nor there, because we're worried about right now adding outcomes to our rubric. So at the bottom of the screen, or at the bottom of the box here, you'll see Find Outcome. So I'm just going to click that, and all it's going to give me, it's going to show me every outcome from the course. So let's say they were doing something where they had to record themselves giving a speech. So I'm going to go to Oral Language, and I'm going to pick 3.2a. It's Speak Clearly. So all I have to do is select the standard that I want and hit Import. And you can see it added that as a line of my rubric. If you want to add more standards, all you have to do is hit Find Outcome again and select a different one. So this one is 3.2b, use appropriate volume and pitch, and I'm going to hit Import. So now I have 3.2a and 3.2b on this rubric. I still have the blank one at the top that they gave me automatically as part of when I created the rubric. I don't need that, so I'm just going to delete it. So right now I have 2 standards on here, and it's a total of 10 points. So when I'm happy with this, I can continue adding. I can add my own that aren't standards based. But when I'm done, I'm just going to hit Create Rubric. And now that rubric exists in my course rubrics. And that's really it. That's all you have to do to create a rubric. Does anybody have a question about that creation process before we move to attaching that to an assignment?
Well, I was going to ask, they're not in the chat right now, but if there are, please add them. But I was going to ask under the criteria, so it shows 3.2a, and when you were selecting that, it had that Speaks Clearly. So is that the longer description, or was that the friendly name? Where does...
No, that is the longer description. So the text box that they provide, that is where you put that. And so because I tend to think in standard numbers,
Right.
and there's no way you can memorize all those. So I do like to put a description in the box so I know exactly which one that is. So I can say like, oh, that's identifies author's purpose, or that's, whatever it might be. So that is why it's important to have that description in there if you are going to go with like the numerical codes. Otherwise, you'd constantly be sitting with a, printout of your standards next to you.
Trying to match the numerics, and
yes.
just being able to provide that for the teacher's purposes as you're setting up your rubric, but also what the student will view, so that they're also not stuck with just that, numeric representation, but they also have like what that means to them and what they're trying to achieve or accomplish. Okay, so that was my question. I don't see anything else in the chat, so if you can,
okay.
we'll keep going. Thank you.
And that triggered something for me. I should add that I showed you the Learning Mastery Gradebook. There is also a student view of that Mastery Gradebook, and so they will see their performance on standards, so they can track their own performance. And that is where it's key that you have that solid description in there. So because a kid is going to look at it and they're not going to have any idea what a 3.2a, that's not meaningful to a child. So that does go back to where it's important to have that description in there.
Right. I'm glad you made that point, because that's something that has come up as we talk about just the activities and different assessments, and student motivation and participation. If that's one of the things that you can set up, then that's one way to have students be able to look at their performance, perhaps look at setting their own goals. And, it's a big challenge, I think, that teachers are facing in some of the questions around moving online and maintaining that motivation and those participation rates. So that's an important thing to know, that students can have a view of this to help them understand where they are in their learning. So thank you.
Yeah, we absolutely want to make them active participants in their own learning. So it's invaluable for that purpose. And we've had kids get super excited about like seeing their scores. Like, you know, for a lot of elementary kids especially, they're not really keyed into, I can remember being excited about seeing my scores when I got tests back, but our kids, like, it's almost like it's not a thing for them. You know, they don't recognize that, you know, they don't see the feedback enough. So they love it, and it's great. All right, so back to this. So we've created our sample rubric. We need to attach that to an assignment so that we can start assessing kids. So I'm going to click on my assignments button over here on the course navigation. These are all the assignments that are currently in this course. I'm going to attach this rubric to the assignment title, verbs, verbs, verbs. So I'm going to click that. And it's going to open up the assignment page for me. Now, you'll notice that this assignment is already created. Everything exists. I'm adding this rubric to it after the fact. So if you scroll down to the bottom of the screen for the assignment, you'll see a button that says Add Rubric. All you have to do is click that. And this is where it gives you the opportunity. If we had not already created one, we can create one here. And it's the same as it is when you create it in the course screen. You can click Find Outcome. You can add all that. But we have one that exists. So I'm going to click Find Rubric over here. And sort of an interesting thing that Canvas does is because I have multiple courses and I have multiple courses that have rubrics in them, it shows me every course that I have and every rubric that I have, which I guess in a way is nice, but also is kind of strange. I don't know why. I'm not sure why they do that. But they do. So I'm going to find the rubric that I just made. So this is my course. This is the shortcut title, which is SC. And if I look in the second column over, I can see I have sample 2, sample 3, and then sample rubric. So sample 3 is the one I just made. So I'm going to click on that. And if I scroll down a little bit, you see in the third and final column, it says use this rubric. So I'll click that. And now you'll see at the bottom of this assignment, it's going to attach that rubric that I created. And you might be wondering, like, why do we want to add rubrics? Not only because it now links those standards and the student's performance on those standards on this particular assignment will now go into the gradebook, but it also makes scoring and grading easier. So from the assignment screen, if I click Speed Grader, this is the view that a teacher will get when they go to grade these assignments. And you'll notice on the scoring panel over here, I have to click View Rubric. And what it'll do is it's going to show me my rubric, and I can select that the student received 5 points for 3.2a and 3.5 points for 3.2b, which means that they got 8.5 out of 10 points. So it does make your scoring of assessments easier. And through SpeedGrader, it's super fast to go through and score. And you're doing so with great specificity to the standards, which is nice because then you can give students very clear feedback on particular standards and their performance, which is amazing. So that is, and there are other things you can apply rubrics to, but that's the main place teachers will be applying them, or to assignments. And that's really it. That's the whole process for linking those standards to your assignments.
Right, and I think there was a question that Cassie, I think Cassie Farish put in earlier about what is the connection between the grades and those outcomes, and I think you just demonstrated how that rubric helps you with scoring that. Yes. And then that does become the score or the grade for that assignment if it's graded. Is there a way to use that to score that based on the rubric and not have it be a grade? So it's scored so the student gets feedback on their performance, but it's not necessarily a grade. What's connection between use of those rubrics and the actual grade that goes into
I think automatically you're going to end up with a grade, but I think the more important piece, and this is an instructor piece, is teaching your students to focus on the learning mastery gradebook as opposed to the regular gradebook, right? So if I look at 8.5 out of 10 on the regular gradebook, that's not as meaningful or as rich a piece of information to me as if I look at it on the Learning Mastery Gradebook, because I can see on the Learning Mastery Gradebook that I got, 5 out of 5 on 3.2a. Like I I did amazing on that. Where I need to work is on 3.2b, because that's the one I got 3.5 out of 5 points on. So there's room for growth there. So I think you've just got to teach students to look at like what piece of feedback do you need to focus on, and we're trying to give them as much information as possible, because if I just tell a kid that essentially you got an 85 on this assignment, that doesn't really tell them anything about what they need to grow on, right? They don't, that doesn't help them understand that, like, oh, well, where you lost points is that, your choice of topic, or which is what 3.2b was, your choice of topic was not quite where it needed to be. So I think that's an instructor issue. Like, we need to explain to our students like where to seek out information about their own process and growth.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's something that, and I mentioned earlier, kind of growing towards this, setting up the those expectations, or that kind of culture around the student being able to see where there's room for improvement, or things that they need to really focus in on or work towards. And that's why I mentioned some of like the goal setting kinds of things. And that gets into some of the personalization and customization for individual students, differentiation, however you want to kind of label that. But this would help in being able to post that and make that conversation point of what went well during this, where you can go next for individual students in those assignments. There is a question if you could just re-show the steps for adding a rubric. So maybe just if you could open that back up and just kind of move back through those steps. We will be posting some resources into the third module around the topics and the things that Jennifer covering today, so you could refer to
Oops.
those.
Hi guys, we have been learning.
And then
Sorry about that.
that's okay. So, and we'll also be posting the recording. So if you wanted to move back through a portion of the recording, so you can stop and start along the way to kind of get that, we'll be posting those resources. So if you're don't stress over being able to get the step by step. We'll provide the resources there, and the video as well, if you wanted to move back through that. So I'll turn it back to you, Jennifer. Go ahead.
Sure. So again, there are two options for where you can create your rubrics. You can do it directly on an assignment. So if I click, let's say, the PE week 3, this is going to open up my assignment. And you do add this after you've created an assignment. It's not actually on the assignment creation screen, which was a little disconcerting for me. So make sure you already have an assignment created, and then go back to that assignment, and at the bottom of the screen you'll have the option to add a rubric. So again, you can do that from this screen, or you can do it from the outcomes screen. So if it matters, I can go ahead and do it from here if people don't care about seeing.
So while you're right here, that question did come in. So you could create it from here. The process, you said, is basically the same. It's just this one is kind of in line with the assignment. Yes. And here's the rubric. If you don't already have one in place, you could create one. If you create it here directly into the assignment, will it still show up in that rubric bank for later, or is this a one-time only?
No, it does. It does put every rubric you create, no matter where you create them, it's going to put them into that bank. So although I'm creating this, so like I could even title this PE week 3, that could be my rubric title, because that's the assignment it's scoring. But you'll notice that, after I create this, it will go into that bank. So if I want to use it on a future assignment, I can. What's going to happen every time you go to create a rubric is it's automatically going to give you a blank standard. So you can, if you wanted to just, without attaching it to one of your standards in your course, if you wanted to just put something specific to this assignment, like spoke clearly, you can do that here. I do not want to do that. I want to actually link this to outcomes, because only if I link it to a standard will it report to the Mastery Gradebook. So if I just type something in here, it's not going to report to any gradebook. It's not going to report to that Mastery Gradebook because it's not linked to a standard. So I would not want.
I think we lost your audio. Jennifer?
3.2C, which is speak at an understandable rate. So I've selected 3.2C. In the bottom right corner, I'm going to hit import. So you can see that now it's given me 3.2C on here with the scoring scheme that was set up in the standard, and that's going to end up being worth 5 points at the end. If I want to add another outcome, I can hit find outcome again and click on 3.2E. Now, one thing I didn't mention before, but that you might have noticed, is that it does give you the option over here in the item or in the standard description. It says use this criterion for scoring. So that box is checked. So that means it's going to use this scale to score the assignment. If I unclick this, and we'll try this out, I believe it's going to let me edit this within this particular assignment. So I'm going to unclick that and hit import. And actually it didn't, so never mind, ignore that. But this is, so you can see that this is the scale that was, again, on the outcome in my outcome screen. So it's a 5-point scale. The threshold, meaning where they reach mastery, is at 4 points. So I've added 2 standards. It's automatically, because both of them are 5-point scale, it's totaling them over here. Oh, I see what it did. Okay, I'm sorry. So when I added 3.23 and I told it not to use the criterion, I told it not to use the point scale, apparently it does not add whatever they score on that to the final score of the project. So however they do on that is not going to impact their score on this assessment or this assignment.
Okay. So that does mean that you could grade them on one of those and give the score based on that, but give them feedback based on the other. Okay. Yeah. So that's a way to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if it's, yeah, exactly. That's the way to put it. If it's something you want to give them feedback on, but not have it impact their score, uncheck that box. If you want it to be a part of their score, make sure that box is checked, which it's automatically going to be checked anyway, so you would have to deliberately uncheck it if you did not want it to score. So I can add as many of these, or I could add every standard from my course if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to add those 3. And I'm going to, it does give you a few more options down here. You can say that you want to add freeform comments to your student assignments. So that means you can give them feedback. This would take away all the points from the rubric. This, I don't know why you'd want to do this, but this would mean that it would not post the outcomes to the Learning Mastery Gradebook. So I'm not really sure why you would want to check that, because the whole point of us adding these outcomes is that we do get that report in the Learning Mastery Gradebook, but you do have the option of not including this. And again, you have the other 2 options. So use it for assignment grading or hide score total for assessment results. This would mean if you click the use the rubric for assignment grading, that means that when you go into SpeedGrader and you click off the boxes, whatever point total that comes up here is going to be their score on that assessment. I would assume, and I'm going to hit create rubric. So now I have a rubric for this assignment that's 15 points total. And if I go into SpeedGrader and hit view rubric, there's my rubric, and I can score my student on that rubric. And it gives them the 12 out of 15. Back to your original, you asked me a question a few minutes ago about, is there a way to not score them, but also use a rubric? And I think there might be, which is if you, let me hit edit on my assignment. And currently this assignment is set to 0 points. So I would assume that that means in the gradebook, they just won't have a score. It will be blank, but you can still use that rubric to give them feedback, and it would still report to the standard in the standard gradebook. So that would be one way that you could, or you can just hit not graded. See if that does it. So if you make the assignment not graded, You can still attach a rubric, which I assume allows you to report to the Learning Mastery Gradebook and give them feedback, but it does not give them an actual score.
It's not part of their grade. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that looks like a way you can manage that, both those things. All right. Did that cover that? Do we feel like we need to look at that again, or?
I think that we answered the questions and you went back through the steps, so that's good. And there'll be some reference material. So if folks are wanting to guide themselves back through this. So just a few more minutes left. Were there other things in particular that you wanted to demonstrate or cover as you were touring through your course?
Well, let me just say there's the one that I use most frequently to get data for the Learning Mastery Gradebook is attaching standards to quizzes. And so I won't go through both of them because Classic Quiz, there are two quizzes now, two quiz options in Canvas. There's a Classic Quiz and there's the new tool. I'm not going to go into Classic Quiz because it would take 15 minutes to go through all the steps to get the outcomes attached. But just know that the resources that I put on that next screen, there is a link to information about how to attach outcomes to an old quiz, to one of the Classic quizzes. And you can do it, and it's just a lot of steps. It's not really hard to do. It's just, 12 steps instead of one. But just really quickly in the new quiz tool. So if I go to add a quiz now, it gives you an option. Do you want a Classic quiz or do you want a new quiz? So if you choose to create a new quiz, and I won't do that because I already have one. If you choose to create a new quiz, when you go in to edit that quiz and add questions, this is what your screen is going to look like. And you hit the blue button to add a question. And these are all the different options of question types. And this is a good reason to use the new quiz system because there are a lot more question types to choose from, including my new favorite, which is hotspot, which is where students can label a picture. So let's say we've created a hotspot question. What you want to do, you see directly, this is the edit screen for that question. One of the options is to align an outcome. So I'm just going to click on align an outcome. And then you click that box and it gives you all the outcomes from your course. So just like with adding it to the rubric, I can go through my outcomes and pick the one that I want to add, check box it. I can, if I wanted to, add multiple standards to one question if you think multiple standards apply, but I'm going to click the one that I think applies and I'm going to hit confirm alignment. And now when that question is created, it's going to have that standard aligned to it. So every time a student takes that quiz and they answer that question, how they do on that question is going to be reported to their Learning Mastery Gradebook. And this is how we did a lot of our SOL prep with students. This is a great way to track their progress on those tested standards and see how they're doing over time. And that's mainly how we've been using it and how it's been extremely helpful for us.
So would this also be true then for items that you're creating for to put in an item bank?
Yes.
Would you be able to? Okay. And then you can choose from the bank based on the
yes, so that is something I have done in the past is if you go to your quizzes page, which is what this is, and with the blue quiz button, if you click the three dots next to it, there's an option that says manage question banks. So if you click that, you'll see that I have unfiled questions and then I have 3.5C. I added the 3.5C question bank, and within that 3.5C question bank, if I open it, you'll see that I've aligned that 3.5C standard over here, and I can start putting questions into this question bank. So any question that tests the 3.5C standard, I would put in this question bank. And then I can pull those questions and put them on any quiz that I want or any assessment that I want. So that is the very quick explanation of question banks. What happens when you create a quiz in the Classic screen? If you don't pull them from an existing question bank, it's going to dump every question from your quiz into this unfiled questions. And if you want to, you can take those unfiled questions and sort them into any of your other question banks. And what that does for you is if I sort it into, say, the 3.5C, I've aligned that 3.5C question bank with that standard. So anything in that question bank that's tested is going to report to that standard. So short answer is it's a lot easier to do in the new quizzes. It's very straightforward. You just put it on directly on the question. Long answer is that it's also easy technically to do in classic quizzes. It's just a lot more steps. So because you can't add it directly to a question. You have to take existing questions and either add them to aligned question banks, or you have to pull from aligned question banks, if that makes sense.
Yes, well, and thank you for that, to determine the difference between the two, because moving towards that new quiz interface, I think, is probably the way to go for teachers, because of being able to add this in, and just many of the things that you just mentioned with the benefits of that. So
yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna, if you can stop sharing, I'll start sharing again.
Okay.
And pick up from where we left off in the presentation. Just that. So this is kind of the overview of what we touched on. We didn't spend as much time adding the outcomes to the quizzes, but that's something that there are additional resources available. And this whole list here, there are links out to the different resources within the Canvas community, and the so we'll be able to post these, as well as the video video recording of today's session, so that you can move back through, find some of these answers on your own. And then, as I said at the beginning, to any questions that you have that come up along something that you're trying to create, or resources that you find, if you can send that to the course facilitators through that inbox, then we can make sure that the questions get answered, and then also any resources that you find can be shared out among the course participants as well. So we'll post all these links there, the recording to the video. Thank you, Jennifer, for your time today. I'm gonna
Thank you.
Stop sharing here for just a second so we can go back in. Are there any last questions? I think we've caught up pretty good with the chat questions. Thank you, Sarah, for also joining in and answering some of the questions. All right, and thank you, Wanda, for that feedback. So we'll be revisiting this topic and kind of moving back through this again with Jennifer on Thursday. Tomorrow we'll have other guests with us to talk a little bit about embedding content, and then also creating the mastery path. So if you'll join us tomorrow for that session, again, all of these will be recorded. The recordings will be posted to the course, and then questions that you might have, or things that come up around these topics, please post those in that inbox so that we can answer your questions, or share out that information with others in the course, and further strengthen this community. So thank you very much for attending today. Thank you, Sarah, for your help. Karen, background, thank you for your help. And again, thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your experience and your expertise with us today. Look forward to seeing you all online tomorrow.
Thank you very much.